Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for our online session exploring the global standard for volunteering for development. My name is Raida Mana, and I am a member of the IAVE team. We hope you're safe and healthy during these uncertain times and always. The International Association for Volunteer Effort strives to build an inclusive network open to individuals and organizations of all capacities and resources. We can go to the next slide, please. Please visit us at iave.org/join now to learn more on how to join, and also follow us on social media. Our network is only robust when you join us. Next slide, please. Led by our colleagues at the International Forum for Volunteering in Development, this webinar will provide information about the newly launched Global Standard for Volunteering for Development and explore how volunteer-involving organizations can use the standard as a tool to advance better practice in responsible and impactful volunteering. Can go to the next slide. At IAVE, we very much believe in the importance of such efforts to advance a global discussion on volunteering and its impact. Members of our newly launched Global Network of Volunteering Leadership, our program to bring together national and regional structures working to strategically move volunteering forward, are taking part in the Standards pilot. We'll get the chance to hear from some of them and their experiences today. The webinar will aim to provide an overview of the standard and why is it important, share information on key activities for 2020 and 2021, as well as details about the pilot and the associated tools and resources. To achieve these goals, we'll hear an introduction to Forum and the global standard, followed by an overview of the process, and then we'll hear what pilot organizations hope to gain from their participation. We'll then have a Q&A session. A couple of important announcements as we start. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for all participants. For questions, please type them in the questions box and we will convey them to our presenters. I would like now to welcome my colleagues James O'Brien, the Executive Coordinator of the International Forum for Volunteering in Development, and Rahim Hassanali, Volunteering Leadership Manager at VSO and the Coordinator of the Development of the Global Standard. They will guide us through this session. Thank you, James and Rahim, and welcome everybody.
Thank you. James, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Raida, and thank you everyone for joining us. We're very grateful to IAVE for the opportunity to speak to you today about the work that we're doing and have done on the global standard for volunteering for development. My job today, as Raida mentioned, I'm the executive coordinator of Forum. I'm joined by Rahim, who has been leading the development and the rollout of the standard so far. And we also have Aaron and Max and Samuel, who are representatives of 3 organizations that are currently piloting the standard, and we're going to hear a little bit from them as well. My job is to begin by giving a fairly top-level introduction to Forum and to the process and the background of the standard. So to begin with, who is Forum? So we're the International Forum for Volunteering for Development. We are a group of about 30 leading volunteering organizations. And really at the heart of our work, the heart of our purpose is to improve the practice and improve the impact of our member organizations. And to do that, we create spaces for them to share information, to share their experiences, to develop and articulate good practice, and to promote cooperation across the international volunteering and development sectors. And we do that in a number of ways. We have a set of working groups that look at research, at planning our conference, a working group on the standard itself. We have an annual conference called IVCO, which last year was hosted by VSO in Kigali, and where we launched the global standard, and which this year is going to be focused on volunteering for climate action in October. We also carry out research and coordinate and commission research through the research working group. We host webinars, and we have an online platform where our members can collaborate. And the conversations around the standard within Forum go back far longer than my involvement in Forum. I think going back 5 or 6 years, the Forum board had been thinking about this question, and the starting point for this was that they saw a gap. That we were aware that there were a lot of individual standards within individual organizations around different elements of volunteering. That in some places, like my own country in Ireland, we have the Code of Good Practice for volunteer sending agencies. So at national level, there were some standards, but there was no global agreed set of good practice standards around volunteering in development. So based on conversations with the board and a series of surveys with members, we set about what we acknowledged at the time would be a very long-term project to develop these standards. So over the course of the last three and a half years, we've carried out desk research, which Raheem led, looking at standards within our sector, looking at other relevant standards outside of volunteering for development. And on the back of that, then we launched a very wide consultation that ran for about 18 months. So we did an online survey, and we followed that with a series of 9 workshops that we held around the world. And the purpose of those was to figure out what should be the content and the structure of the standard itself, and also what should be the mechanism for using the standard, how should it be managed. And we engaged in over 80 countries, we engaged over 600 people through this consultation process, and that led us to what was launched at IVCO last year in Kigali, which is the global standard for volunteering for development. Behind that, actually, if we could just skip back to the previous slide again, there's just a few points that, as well as looking at those key learning questions in the consultation, we were also grappling with some of the bigger philosophical issues around having a standard and sharing and overseeing a standard as a network. And based on those conversations and the consultation, we made a couple of really key decisions that are guiding our work even now. The first was that the standard should be open to anyone. So it's something that's been created by Forum. We've had huge support from our members, and in particular from VSO over the last couple of years in developing the standard. But this is something that we're offering to our members and offering to the world. So the standard is freely available on our website, currently in French and Spanish, and hopefully in the next English and Spanish, and hopefully in the next few days there'll be a French version up there as well. And secondly, and crucially, that the standard is voluntary. It's not a condition of membership of Forum, that we're not hanging anything on adherence to the standard, and that fundamentally the purpose of the standard is to drive and encourage and direct good practice within the volunteering for development sector. It's about good practice rather than compliance. So Forum doesn't award a score to people based on doing a self-assessment on the standard. It's really for organizations to pick up themselves, to apply, to do a self-assessment based on the standard, to come up with an action plan based on the self-assessment, and to use the standard as a guide or a tool to improve their own performance, to identify areas where they think they can improve, and to take action to improve their performance in those areas. And really, for me personally anyway, the standard is, the really exciting thing about the standard is what comes behind the standard itself. So at the moment, as we'll get onto, we're in a pilot phase with the standard, but ultimately we want to develop a set of resources and supports, including an online repository of good practice documents, direct support that'll be a mentoring that'll be provided to organizations in implementing the standard, and also a framework for peer support for organizations to support each other. And what's really exciting, as I say, is not an organization going through a standard and saying, well, we feel that there's room to improve on, for example, volunteer duty of care, and here's how we're going to improve it. But what's really exciting is figuring out, as Forum, if we acknowledge that there's lots of organizations struggling with a particular issue, how then do we pool our own experience and our knowledge as a sector to improve performance on that question across the board, and what supports can we provide to our members and the wider volunteering for developing community in doing that. And that really is the purpose of the standard. So where are we now in the process, and what exactly did we launch in Kigali? I think following that consultation process, what we've launched really is a statement, and I think the first statement of its kind that reflects a consensus, a broad consensus based on a broad consultation on what good practice in volunteering for development looks like. And that's what we have. But and that's a huge step forward. But coming in after that, what we've done in the last few months is develop the supports and resources that organizations need to take the standard and to use it to make a difference within their organizations. And Raheem will get into a little bit more of the detail around what those resources are. And we've tried to answer the question of how is it used and applied, what's the process around the standard. Crucially, one of the big questions that came up when we launched the standard in Kigali was, it's global, so how is it going to play out in different contexts? How is it going to work for organizations of different sizes, with different missions, working in different areas? And really that's led us into the pilot phase that we're in now. So currently, and over the course of the rest of this year, we're in a period of piloting and validation of the standard. So we have, I think at one stage we were talking about having 4 or 5 organizations in a pilot, and we now are very lucky to have 28 really excellent, really diverse organizations from around the world that have agreed to join a pilot program to run for the rest of this year. We have 3 of them who are going to be presenting, and a few more who I know are on the line today. And over the course of this year, they're going to be doing a self-assessment based on the standard, looking at different areas of their own work. Based on the self-assessment, they're going to be developing an action plan, and then they're going to be putting that action plan into action within their own organizations and making changes in the back of that. While that pilot process is going on, we're going to be surveying those organizations. We've already done an initial baseline survey with them. And based on the input and the feedback that we gather from the piloting organizations, we're going to be reviewing and revising the standard, reviewing and revising the processes around implementing the standard. And then next year, we're going to be rolling out a new version of the standard that integrates all of that feedback. And that's going to be rolled out much further than those 28 organizations, beginning at IVCO 2021 in October of next year. So that's the plan broadly. I'm going to hand over now to Raheem, who, as I say, has been very involved in the detail of the standard, and he's going to give you a much more granular sense of what the standard involves and what the processes around it involve. And then we're going to, as I say, hear from a couple of those organizations who are currently piloting the standard. So thank you very much. Looking forward to answering some questions later on, but for now I'll hand over to Raheem.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Yes, as James mentioned, we had a 3-year consultation period, and one of the things we were really battling with and trying to get a consensus of globally with people from volunteering involved in organisations across the globe was, how do we define volunteering for development? So that's one of the first things which anchors the standard, is how do we define volunteering for development? And then we had 2 pillars, and in our design principles, we aimed, and our aspirations was for the standard to champion and really promote the advancement of responsible and impactful volunteering. So through this consultation, we came to a consensus, which was no easy feat, and here we have it here. So I'll just read these out to you. So in terms of volunteering for development, as defined in the standard, volunteering for development draws on the skills of volunteers to work alongside people and communities to improve their quality of life and support their own capacities to help address poverty and inequality in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Volunteering for development activities must always aim to be impactful and responsible. The other definitions that we came to was what is impactful volunteering and what is responsible volunteering, and this is: impactful volunteering delivers measurable and sustainable improvements for poor and marginalized communities that align to a country's national development agendas and the SDGs. And responsible volunteering ensures that volunteering activities are locally identified and designed to respond to the needs of the communities as defined by those communities. The selection, preparation of volunteers ensures that they can deliver impactful volunteering in an equal partnership with the community. In the delivery of these activities, no harm will come to members of the community and volunteers. So there we have it, and these are sort of the main principles of the standard and what the standard is wishing to promote, which is impactful and responsible volunteering. The standard in itself, we came to a conclusion that there are 4 areas that are pivotal, interconnected areas that are pivotal to all of our work as volunteering involved organisations, and these were the following. These were these 4 areas, which is designing and delivering projects, duty of care, managing volunteers, and measuring impact. And when we talk about duty of care, and each of the other 4 themes, we established commitment statements, which we wanted to really make sure it articulates what our commitment is as volunteer and involving organisations within these 4 themes. So in terms of duty of care, the commitment is the community can expect that volunteer involving organisations and the people associated with them will protect and will allow no harm to come to anyone in the community in which they operate, whether volunteers or local community members. Organisations recognise that they all have a duty of care to not cause or fail to prevent psychological or physical harm to volunteers, employees and other associates. Managing volunteers, the commitment statement was volunteers can expect to receive preparation, training and support which ensures effective, impactful and ongoing engagement in supporting the development of efforts locally and internationally. Measuring impact, our commitment is that communities, funders and other stakeholders can expect that the intended impact of a project is identified by the community before the start and is tracked throughout, using information and insights from the community, volunteers and other relevant stakeholders. Project success is defined with the community and by the community. And lastly, which is the one I should have started off with, is designing and delivering projects. Our commitment is that communities, organisations and volunteers can expect to be involved in collaboratively designed and effectively delivered volunteering for development projects which respond to community needs and deliver impactful and sustainable outcomes. Now, what does the actual standard look like? So I'm just going to take you through that very briefly. The standard, as well as these commitment statements within these 4 themed areas, we also have the scopes within each area which outlines who the theme is relevant to and what our desired outcome is when we implement the standard in these 4 areas. Each of these themes are broken up into components. So for example, duty of care would have 3 different areas which covers safety and security, safeguarding and protection, and health and well-being. As does the other themes as well. And then we have descriptors of each area as well, so trying to make it as comprehensive as possible. Each of these themes and areas also have a number of key actions which are split into core key actions. And when we mean core key actions, what we mean by that is these are minimum best practice standards we do expect organisations to be adhering to. And we have a number of other key actions as well, which is more comprehensive, where we've sort of aligned thinking and reached a consensus that this is good practice for the sector. And then each key action will have an indicator. So how do we sort of evidence that we're meeting these key actions? So that's the structure of the standard. As James mentioned, we're really happy to have 28 organisations on board to help us to validate the standard, to look at how it works in practice. And the tools and resources we've created to make that happen is done through self-assessment. So we've got a self-assessment tool which is interactive and gives organisations not only a chance to sort of see where they're at, but also has loads of visuals, so it's quite accessible and gives people like a scale of where they are at in their journey of continuous learning and improvement. And we also have an associated resource, which is a learning action plan, so organisations can see areas that they may wish to work on and then actually take from the learning from that and create specific actions that will help them develop learning and improve certain areas of that the standard relates to. Now, I'm not going to say any more apart from just echo James's guiding principles. The standard was not built to be a compliance-based exercise or a tick box exercise. It was really about giving organisations, large, big, small, no matter where you're based and what volunteering modality you work with, giving you the opportunity to learn and improve and also share good practice as well. So that's the aim. So now we're going to hear from 3 of our organisations that are piloting the standard. And the first person to speak is going to be Samuel. And Samuel, I'll let you have quickly introduce yourself. Samuel's from Bionet, so he'll just quickly tell you what he does. And then Samuel, we have Erin after Samuel and Max, and what they will cover is why the standard is relevant to their organisations, what might be the challenges in piloting the standard, especially over this period of time, and what their organisations hope to gain from the standard. So over to you, Samuel. Samuel, can you hear us?
Hi everyone. It's good.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I can hear you. Yep.
Yes. Thanks, Ryan. Hi everyone. Hope we are keeping well. I don't know if I have to read what's in this on the screen, right? Otherwise, I just have to go directly to the answer. But I worked for VSO Sierra Leone, and then I also provide support to Vionet. It's a volunteer involving organization network, and the network has over 40 organizations, both ranges from local to national network to international, and also we have in the support of government and some government organizations like the Ministry of Youth, the National Youth Service, and then the National Youth Commissions, and then with the government Ministry of Planning and Economic Development working around the SDG. All of them are part of Vionet, and Vionet was founded by VSO and co-founded by United Nations volunteers. So that's just brief, and have been coordinator, supporting and coordinating activities around volunteering for development across, now working with VSO around the youth engagement as project assistant. And then to go to the questions, actually, we have gone through the standard. We've taken all organizations, all members of the network through the standard and across the 4 regions, because we have a network established in the 4 regions of the country. And then with doing so, we have been able to capacitate the network members about the standard. And so from that point, we see the standard to be very much of high importance to us, because it helps us improve on formulating policies regarding volunteering, and also it strengthens our implementation skills in project planning, delivery, and management of volunteers. We're not thinking at large, just like how the standard the standard is set up. Actually, we thought it's actually a very good starting point for us to see how we can start to think around what the standard said about those things. And also with the help of the standard, environment is a better place in order to train or plan activities and implement projects, because of some of the key guidelines the standard talks about, which we consider to be that community is at the forefront in everything that we want to do, and we have to get them involved in it. And then our project has been partially involved with not getting the community at the forefront, but with the standard, I mean, we've been able to see how we go back to the drawing board and we direct ourselves. Going to question 2, talks about the challenges at this time. It's quite evident to say that all countries, most of the countries are under restrictions, so that it has a great effect in terms of how do we implement the standard at this point. And we believe that this is a very big opportunity for organizations or network like us to implement the standard, considering the area of taking note of the area of duty of care, the aspect of do no harm, and how do we ensure we exercise them. But because of the restrictions of movement due to national and inter-district lockdown instituted by the government, makes us quite limited for us to move, or member organizations to move to implement it. The aspect of social distancing, which we must keep to, actually also limit us greatly affected the work that we are doing. We had to do it's something in a quite unusual way at this point, and it's actually affects us. And then the minds of our people focus on the messages that has to do with COVID-19 rather than other messages of development. So in doing so, it's more or less like how do we probably not too much focus on the usual way of doing things, but how do we customize our work at this point, looking at the COVID-19 and picking out some of the key principles of the standard involved in the awareness raising. And then coming to question 3, that talks about what we have to gain out of it. I think for now, we have gained a lot of knowledge in terms of how do we position ourselves going further to act responsibly, deliver projects inclusively, having the communities involved, and how do we as well ensure that management of our volunteers, which was more of a challenge. And with the standard, we've been able to use some of the key guidelines, and which has actually helped us in that point. We have been able to properly plan our projects in this case in terms of management of how do we plan our projects, and also how do we align our volunteers with those projects in terms of implementations. So for this point, I think those were just few of the many other ways we have benefited in terms of even how it helps us to inform or engage government with regards to certain policies that has to do with young people. How do we get them aligned with regards to volunteering, young people engage in youth volunteering as well. The document serves us or better places us to engage governments to implement some of what is in the policy, what is in the standard, sorry, to be included in our policy formulations work, and also frame up some few policies around volunteering in Sierra Leone. So sort of brief, we are better placed after the with the standard, we are better placed to undertake volunteer for development activities and also development activity in general. So that's from our side. I just want to say much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel. So we're going to hand over to Erin right now. So Erin, yeah, brilliant. Your camera's working. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Erin, and I'm the Director of the Volunteer Cooperation Program at World University Service of Canada, or WUSC. We're a nonprofit organization based in Canada. And WUSC has been deeply involved in developing the global standard from the beginning. We were one of the founding members of the forum working group that led this process over the last few years. So it has been clear and important to us that we need to invest in generating the evidence that's going to help us to really know the broader impact of volunteering for development, and to strengthen our practice and the practice of others in the field of volunteering for development, and be able to really critically demonstrate our value. We want to make sure that we have the right mechanisms in place, and that we're asking the right questions. We've been doing this we've been working in volunteering for development for decades. And I think it's an interesting reflection as we've embarked on this self-assessment process to realize just how much more there is we need to do. We really wanted to get involved in the pilot because we were just keen to get going. We didn't want to wait for the full standard rollout next year. And the timing of this pilot also perfectly aligns for us with the launching of a new 7-year phase of volunteer cooperation programming for our organization. And equally, there's a number of new staff, myself included, who have just joined WUSC. So we're bringing lots of experience and new ideas, and the time was really right for us as an organization to start the reflection and the change process and get us launched on the right path. And so we have started the self-assessment process, working across the organization, and it's been humbling to see just as I say how much work there is to do, even in areas where I think I would have anecdotally thought we were doing okay. When you really dig deep or really look at the full question, how it's framed, you realize that you're falling short in a number of areas. So that's been a humbling but really good practical outcome of working through the self-assessment process. Another motivation for us is that we really want to be recognized within Canada as a leader for volunteering for development practice. We want to be recognized for quality program design and delivery, and how we monitor our programs. And we want to be recognized by our volunteers and our partners, our donors, the other volunteer cooperation agencies, and the public. One of the things that really excited us about getting involved in the pilot is being part of the truly global range of V4D organizations who are engaging in this pilot. It's such a diverse range, as James and Raheem mentioned, a range of organizations with different sizes and different missions, and you really get the sense that together we're going to be able to stress test this tool, its functionality, its accessibility, its relevance. We're going to be able to kind of test it and improve it, so that by the time we're ready to roll it out next year, it's really going to be robust. I do want to just speak briefly about kind of how we've approached it within our organization. We've limited our self-assessment for this pilot process to focusing only on those core minimum standards. So next year we will aim to kind of embark on the full assessment, but for the purposes of this year, we focused on the core minimum standards, and we've approached it by doing an initial internal assessment, consulting widely across the organization, and then we're aiming to test our assessment with our partners and volunteers to get that broader perspective. And then out of that is, as Raheem mentioned, the action plan, and that for us is the really critical piece. So we're creating a two-prong learning and action plan. So the first piece will really be identifying those quick wins, the ones that we hope to be able to quickly sign off as fully met, so that we are, when we submit in July, we are able to say, you know, we have met those indicators. But probably the more fulsome list will be the long-term action plan that will take us into next year, and hopefully set an agenda for how we can improve over the coming year. Challenges of piloting the standard during COVID-19. COVID has thrown us all for a loop. We're obviously all having to practice extreme adaptive management, and I think unexpectedly this has turned out to be a very, very busy period as we're scrambling to pivot our program delivery model to adjust to the reality of COVID. At the same time, while continuing to provide support to our partners. It's super unclear what the long-term impacts of this crisis are going to be on our program model, when we're going to be able to resume mobilizing international volunteers the way we traditionally have done, and what that will look like. So we're having to anticipate our future with a very unknown sort of path ahead. So we're sort of grappling with that at the same time as we're engaging in the pilot. Equally, we haven't been able to engage our partners, or we anticipate not being able to engage our partners as deeply as in this process as we wanted to, because they just have many competing preoccupations right now, and we're having to choose our points of engagement very carefully. But at the same time, I would say, as we've sort of gone through the process, or going through the process, we've really come to realize how the principles outlined in the standard apply equally to our adapted e-volunteer program as they do to our in-person volunteer program. So how we engage with partners and communities, safeguarding duty of care policies, preparation for volunteers, training, how we manage our volunteers, how we measure the impact of our programs. It's all equally relevant across our adaptive program as it is in our sort of more traditional program that we were implementing to date. So as a result, I think this assessment process is actually, it's been an uncertain time, but it's been quite grounding, reminding us of the important principles that are really underlining our work and helping to kind of bed that down for us. And lastly, just to quickly say what we're hoping to gain from the pilot, we're looking for a clear steer around the gaps in our practice, a realistic plan for how to bring about improvements so that we can concretely, with evidence, say that we are impactful and responsible in how we work with and through volunteers to deliver our development projects. I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, Erin. And now we have Max, who's going to give a short introduction and answer the same questions. Max, over to you.
Yes. I'm Max Ventura. I'm currently the chair for the Philippine Coalition on Volunteerism. PhilCV, as we are known, aims to be the apex organization for volunteer involving organizations in the Philippines, and we're composed of SEC registered volunteer involving organizations, and we number about 30. At the onset, when PhilCV was established in 2014, we already crafted the roadmap on development volunteering in the Philippines. And our stated goal was really to standardize and institutionalize having a volunteer management system to really professionalize the volunteer sector. And we wanted to be the standard bearer, literally and figuratively, for VIOs for development in the country. So it was not difficult for us to really decide to participate in crafting the global standards for volunteering for development. I was fortunate enough to have participated in Kigali for the launch, and we So we welcome the global standards for volunteering for developing the mix as we pave the road for volunteering for nation building in the Philippines. We held a forum learning session last November 29, soon after the Kigali event, to introduce the global standard in PhilCV's General Assembly. And the key takeaway then was really the need to localize some elements of the standard. We had a very lively discussion, and Rahim was present when we did that. And there was really a call to sort of localize, contextualize some of the elements of the standard. So we had agreed to go on a roadshow to introduce the global standards to more constituents in central and southern Philippines. And we were poised to do that. However, the pandemic has overtaken us at the moment. So, which brings us to the challenges that we're facing in piloting in the time of Corona. One challenge, really, even if there was no Corona, was the sheer number of our constituency. The Philippines has a lot of volunteer organizations, and since we desire to be the apex organization, we need to reach out to the micro and small organizations that are quite a number. So that was one of the challenges. Now, we could have overcome that challenge with the technology and have a webinar like this. However, the challenge is the connectivity in the other parts of the country and also the logistics for virtual access. So volunteering has traditionally been face-to-face. So we were poised to do that with the roadshow. And then, of course, the third challenge is in terms of resources, we had a limited budget, and we were actually exploring other funding sources to go around this challenge and try to collaborate also with our government counterpart, in order to really roll out the standards across the country. Now, in terms of the benefits, we foresee the benefits if we are able to complete the exercise of piloting the standards. That is just like Erin, we really want to reaffirm our role of PhilCV as the standard bearer of the volunteer sector in the country, and really to establish our role, no? And secondly, we're also able to work towards our stated goals, and then localize and adapt the standards to our context. And then, of course, lastly, overall, we hope that with wider acceptance of the standards, we can really improve the performance of our volunteer involving organizations and improve the outcomes of volunteering in the country. So hopefully, well, given this pandemic, we also saw the opportunity to host another webinar. It was entitled Volunteering at the Time of Corona. And it was an opportunity for us to sort of segue to the standard, and the theme of duty of care was front and center during the discussion, because we really did not want to imperil the lives of the volunteers, and there were a lot of things that had to be put in place to really allow people to volunteer in this time of pandemic. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Erin and Sam. I think we had a few technical difficulties, so we had the PowerPoint stuck on Samuel while Erin was speaking, so I'm very sorry about that. And just, I guess, just to summarize, we as the Forum Standards Working Group, we have our aims for this pilot process as well. And it's really important that organizations from the broader volunteering for development sector, are key in this process of testing, because it will help us improve. And the things we really want from the pilot is to really test the content and the structure of the standard. Does it work in practice? And we really want that volunteering for development organization's voice in informing the revisions for 2021 before we roll out globally. We also want organizations to validate and test the self-assessment process. So making sure that that is as strong as it can be and as useful as it can be for volunteering involving organizations for the global rollout. And then lastly, we just want to make sure that what we've worked so very hard on over the last 3 years is helpful for not just the big organizations, but also the small grassroots organizations, really the full diversity of organizations that work through and with volunteers in different ways and in different geographical locations. It's really important that this tool, the standard, is for volunteering for, is not only just for volunteering for development it's not only for volunteering involving organizations, but it's by volunteering involving organizations. So that's really, really important to us. And at the end, James and Ryder will tell you about how you can get involved in supporting this effort and helping to test and improve the standard ready for the global rollout in 2021. I'm going to hand back over to Ryder now, so we do have a good, healthy amount of time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raheem, James, Erin, Max, and Sam for all of your explanation and remarks. We are getting some questions. I'm going to start with a general one that we got. Someone is wondering if the standard includes measurable insights on aspects such as social impact metrics that can be used to evaluate volunteering initiatives.
So yeah, I believe our measuring impact theme covers three different areas, which is around how you not only measure, but how you report, how you plan your measurements, how you do measuring, and then how you sort of exit that process as well. And within that, there are a number of areas which do include social impact metrics. Well, what we're very keen on with the standard is around measuring impact is actually putting community at the forefront within that. So the core key actions and actually the additional key actions would cover areas around that as well. So you'd have to download the standard and see, but there definitely, if there is something missing that you feel could be better, that's what we really want to hear.
There's some flexibility, if I could jump in there as well, around the types of indicators that organizations use in reporting as well. I think because we're in the pilot phase, that we've sort of set the standards themselves and broken them down into substandards, but we're also interested from hearing different measures or different ways of measuring against the standard that piloting organizations come up with, and feeding that into the next round of it. So I think we sort of give suggestions, and we've developed a sort of interactive self-assessment tool that sits alongside the standard and matches each of the dimensions of the standard, and organizations can kind of enter into that what level they feel they're at and what evidence they have to support the fact that they're at that level. But the evidence is, like, we provide some guidance on the evidence, but at the same time, at this point, because we're in a pilot, it's also open-ended. So if there are types of evidence, in particular, like for example, around social impact, that organizations feel sort of defend the status that they or the level that they've put themselves at within the self-assessment process, then it's possible for them to feed them in themselves. So we try not to be too too controlling in the types of evidence that organizations use to back up their assessment of where they are against each of the elements of the standard.
Fantastic. We're getting a question about the participation of government, particularly in the design and delivery stage of the standard. And at what point does the government have a seat at the table?
Yeah, this is something that came up in our conversations at IVCO as well. The consultation process happened amongst volunteer involving organizations, and that included a mix of NGOs and also some government agencies. So Forum is made up of a number of government agencies, including NOREC from Norway, JICA and FOICA from Japan and Korea respectively. I think as part of the process as well, we included the Peace Corps and a few other government agencies. So they were, I guess, through their volunteering arms involved in the consultation process. I think our hope is ultimately that when we have worked our way through the pilot phase and we have a finished product that we're going to roll out further, that this would be the starting point for other organizations, including governments, to develop their own standards around volunteering. So we're aware of a couple of NGOs, a couple of governments, and in particular local governments at the moment that are looking at developing, and also government agencies like the NHS in the UK has been in contact with us around developing their own set of standards around volunteering and how they can learn from our standard. So our hope is ultimately that this is the starting point, or that this is kind of the core from which other organisations, including government, can draw in developing their own sets of standards for volunteering. So that's a little bit more future focused, but in terms of their involvement in the consultation process, they were there through the forum members who are themselves government agencies. Is there anything you want to add, Raheem?
Yeah.
Yes, some of the organisations that were involved in developing the standard as it was launched have used it to lobby government around what might be a foundation or basis for national standards. So this was one of our aspirations, and we want to see how this is a very few organisations that are using it to lobby government to influence national standards. We've also been engaged with the African Union as well, who are looking to the standard for inspiration, but also content for their continental standard that they're developing at the moment currently. So it's an aspiration. We'd like to see how that goes, and I think Max has got an example of how it's been used in the Philippines to do exactly that.
Yes, thank you, Raheem. In the Philippine experience, we really at the onset engaged our government counterpart. They were actually present during that forum that we hosted last November 29, and they were part of the discussion. And they raised some concerns which we were hoping to address as we roll out the standards. But what I think is very important is to engage them at the onset so that this can be a journey together, and that given that they have a similar desire as well to improve the outcomes in the volunteer sector, it's good to be able to engage them immediately at the onset. And so far, I think we'll be able to work closely with them, and hopefully they will be also on board as we roll out the global standards.
Fantastic, thank you all. We're getting a question, and this is about the concept of a volunteer that is included on the standard. Galina from Russia is asking, are volunteers who act individually and not through an organization, those who are referred by the ILO as direct volunteers, included in the definition of volunteers under the global standard? And if not, how can their experiences and their work also be acknowledged?
Yeah, the focus of the standard is on organizations. So the standard is to be adopted and applied by sort of any organization that relies on volunteers to achieve its mission, or any organization that works with and through volunteers. And that was the sort of definition of who the audience is for the standard that we started out with from the outset. And that's very much the focus. So it's looking at the practice of the organizations that support and recruit and deploy volunteers, rather than being a set of standards for the volunteers themselves. I guess that's a direction that we could go in the future, but at the moment, the focus is on a set of standards for those organizations rather than the volunteers themselves.
Yeah. And just adding to that, yeah, so it is for formal organizations that have formal volunteers, but we have a couple of organizations that attended our launch in Kigali, who also have a huge number of informal volunteers as well, or they're aware of a lot of informal volunteering in the community. So although they're applying the standard to their formal volunteering activity, they're also using the standard as learning to see how they can improve and support the informal effort at national level as well. So this is something, you know, from the pilot we're really looking to learn is, although our intention and the standards made for that formal volunteering effort, what is the secondary impact, or what is the impact on sort of informal networks and volunteering efforts at country level as well?
That's a very important point, and I think we're seeing a lot of rise of informal volunteering and different ways in which communities are getting engaged with everything happening with COVID. So it's also an interesting point to explore in the future. But yes, for now, the scope and the scale of the standard is very clear in terms of it being an organization, a tool for organizations. We have two questions, and I would like to connect them. We're getting a question about how can the standards be applied to the private sector, if that is possible, and also to community level initiatives.
So under the design principles of the standard, we wanted the ambition for the standard, again, this is something we're testing, is that it will be applicable and useful for all organizations that involve volunteering in development efforts. And we hope that would extend to sort of, community level initiatives, but also the private sector as well. So that has always been the aspiration. I don't believe we have any private organizations on board at the moment that are involved in the pilot, but this is something we should be seeking. Actually, this is good you raised that. It's something we should be seeking a sector we should be seeking to engage with, especially at this point in time.
I think we have plenty of organizations in the pilot that are including VEONet, Samuel's organization, whose sort of bread and butter as an organization is community level initiatives, and I think they're well represented amongst the pilot organizations, and we're well represented in the consultation process as well. I think the private sector is an area that we haven't really. I think probably IAVE is a lot better established within private sector volunteering than Forum is. I know we've had a couple of inquiries and a couple of people who have kind of downloaded the standard and that we're aware are engaging with it from the private sector, but we haven't. I think because we started with the core Forum group and then expanded to the signatories of the Kigali Declaration after IVCO last year, we don't have the private sector represented in the pilot. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think it's a really interesting one, and maybe something we should look to address and bring one or two representatives of private sector volunteer involving into the pilot process even at this stage.
Thank you. How are you going to ensure that the standards also complement other existing volunteer standards? We're getting an example of the investing in volunteers in the UK as a standard as well. Is there any thinking about how to connect the tools and how to find commonalities?
Yeah, we did mapping as part of the initial desk research exercise, and I think we found 300 different volunteering standards from within organizations. So in developing the standards and sort of keeping them at the level they're at, and giving organizations the option of doing core or comprehensive, and giving particularly piloting organizations the option of simply looking at 1 or 2 or 3 of the 4 pillars of the standard, or taking on all of them if they prefer, that there is kind of flexibility there, and we have tried to incorporate or kind of work around, or to try to ensure there's not too arduous for organizations that are reporting in multiple directions and reporting against multiple standards to also take on the global standard. So for that reason, we sort of kept the self-assessment process relatively light touch and sort of voluntary, so organizations, like I say, can dip into individual areas or do the whole thing and can focus on the core or the comprehensive status. But I think ultimately there are so many different sets of standards out there that it's impossible to integrate in kind of a proactive way with all of them, or it's impossible to align in a way that sort of one set of reporting for the global standard can double up for the individual national level or organizational standards, or reporting to donors or reporting to umbrella groups at national level that aren't focused on volunteering necessarily. But we did, in the mapping exercise, try to take account of those and to design the standards in such a way that it isn't overly arduous for organizations who are reporting in multiple directions to also be reporting themselves on the global standard.
Yeah. Also, the intention of the mapping of the hundreds of standards that we did look at was to pull all the good practice together in one place, because all of the standards that we did map were either for very specific niches of the sector or at national level. So we wanted to recognize all of the standards in there and pull it together in one. So we're not the global standard pulls the best of what we've seen. It's not something new, it's just pulling good practice all together in one place. So hopefully we should have a complementary standard with other standards that organizations should be following.
Great. Yeah. We are getting a lot of questions about how different sectors can be involved in the standards and their and the pilots, such as we already discussed, the governments, private sector, religious leaders. So it's also interesting to know what can be next steps for those who would want to participate and contextualize the standards to their organizations and their countries. And if this is a tool, if you're expecting this to be a tool for policymaking.
Yeah, I'll address the first part first in terms of how to get involved. The pilot process is in train now, so we've gone through a process and identified those 28 organizations, and we've started sort of the onboarding process and the initial baseline review. So that pilot group is sort of set at this stage. You can see the standard on the forum website, so we will put up the link on the last slide to where you can download the standard itself. And we're also happy that we've developed a guidance document around the standard in multiple languages. We've designed a self-assessment tool in English, French, and Spanish as well. And we're happy to share those documents with any organization that at this stage in the process wants to learn more or to pick up those documents, or even independently to go through a self-assessment process or an action planning process. The pilot group, as I say, is kind of closed at this stage. And one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons there's a cap on it, is that we're planning on providing one-to-one mentoring support to each of the piloting organizations. And we're also keen to gather information and feedback from them and develop case studies based on the experience of those piloting organizations. So it's for that reason that there has to be a limit on that. As I say, we're going to be rolling out the standard more widely next year. So if you're interested at this point in learning more about the standard, we'll put up my contact details and Raheem's contact details as well. And if you download the standard, we also ask you to enter your name and the name of your organization and your email address. And we'll be keeping those organizations that have expressed an interest in the standard through downloading it updated on the pilot process as we go along, and preparations for the further rollout next year. But that's where we are in terms of the process now. In terms of different groups that can pick up the standard, I mean, we've set that quite a wide definition of the types of organizations that we think can be involved. And like I say, any organization that relies on volunteers to achieve its mission. And similarly, quite a wide definition of volunteering for development and impactful and responsible volunteering. So it isn't just for the types of organizations that are traditionally involved in forum, and it should apply equally to religious organizations or like faith-based volunteer involving organizations, to the private sector, to government. And it's designed in such a way as it's broad enough to apply to different types of organizations that are working with volunteers to achieve their mission. And finally, I guess the question around policy making. It's not necessarily designed as that. So the function of the standard is looking kind of inward within organizations at practice and improving good practice. And as forum, we sort of don't see ourselves as having a normative role in going out and saying to governments, this is the type of good practice. We are talking to UNV about potentially using the standard when they provide advice to governments on developing volunteer policies. So I think it has a role there. And as forum, we're involved in the Volunteer Groups Alliance and in advocacy at that level. We're involved in promoting volunteering. But at the moment, I think we're, with the capacity that we have and what we've taken on with the pilot process and all the organizations that are involved in that, really our focus and the focus of the 2-year plan that we're in at the moment is on kind of validating the standard, making sure that it works in different contexts, and then rolling it out to a wider audience next year. I think further down the line, there could be a role in policy. And for example, if governments are developing national level volunteering policies or laws, and I know some of our members have been involved in those processes, that it could be a guide in that, or it could be a resource for them in developing those policies. But at the moment, as I say, the focus is on getting it right and then rolling it out further rather than it being a policy tool at this stage.
The great thing is IABE is also one of the pilot members who will be coordinating feedback from their membership. So if you are an IABE member organization and you wish to engage with giving feedback, and that will be done coordinated through Ryder and her team, you know, please do get involved, because we really want to hear your voices through that feedback loop. So that will be coordinated by IRBA. So if you're an IRBA member, please do come forward, do get in touch with Ryder and us as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting so many questions. We're running out of time, but it's very interesting to read from some comments in terms of analyzing how the standard will take into account everything that is changing with the current situation, including maybe digital volunteering, considering the value of volunteer hours and impact assessments on specific things like that. I think what's important to mention right now is that this is a process that goes in stages. And right now, the process is in a very interesting pilot stage with organizations from all over and with different backgrounds trying to implement the standards. And we heard from Erin, and I think that is you, Rahim, and James can confirm, is that a lot of these organizations, what they're doing first is implementing the standards with themselves as an organization, and then spread it out to their members. And that is definitely, it seems that with everything that is happening, that is going to be a challenge, but that doesn't mean it's going to be impossible. It's just going to require more creativity and finding new ways to connect. But I think that's the most important conclusion of this discussion, is that this is a process that works in stages. And right now, it would be very important to gain more traction, and also learning from those who are interested in being a part of the second or third stage of the process. With that, I want to thank you all. We're always very happy to partner with our colleagues at Forum to explore all of these very important efforts. And as Rahim said, at IAVE, we're more than happy to welcome your thoughts, your questions, and I will leave it to Rahim and James to give us a little bit of a call to action and next steps.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryder. Thanks for having us today. I do hope we'll have an opportunity to do this again, maybe in 6 or 9 months' time when we're further down the road with the pilot process, and to talk to you again. Thanks also for all of the questions. I think there's a lot of food for thought. There's a couple of things that we probably hadn't factored in that we need to think about going forward, and I think it's been a really valuable experience for us, and it's sorry that we have to cut it short. In terms of calls to action, you take a look on our website. The link is there. You can download the global standard in various languages, and you can register your interest in doing that. And also get in touch with us, get in touch with myself and Rahim. We're happy to talk to you about the standard or how you might apply it within your own organization. And like I say, there's lots of other resources around this. So if you're interested in seeing the guidance documents, seeing the self-assessment tool, even if you're interested in looking at some of the research, the desk research and the mapping that we did in the early stages of all this, that's all available. So we're always happy to talk about the standards and to share. And I think it comes back to the philosophy of the standard, that this is something that we've led on, but that we want to make open to any organization that's interested in picking it up and using it. So please do get in touch, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to you again about the standards.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day wherever you are, morning, afternoon. And definitely we'll keep sharing information about the standards in our social media, and we might do a session in 6 months and see what the next stage is. So thank you, Rahim, James, Max, Sam, and Erin, and good day to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.